The horror game genre has always been important to me. It introduced me to how addicting games revolving around scary things were to play. My thoughts on horror when I was younger was that horror games were a lot like horror movies. I thought people tend to only use horror for a quick scare and not much more. I would have never thought that a horror game could possibly be fun, let alone enjoyable. That is, until August 8th, 2014, when the most influential horror game of its time was released. Five Nights at Freddy's. Five Nights at Freddy's was different than any other horror game around this time. Its gameplay loop of being stuck in a room and unable to escape and still needing to defend yourself was a brand new way to experience horror in 2014. It had gameplay that was both entertaining and challenging, where failure would result in not only a loss, but a jump scare that followed. This would then lead me down the rabbit hole of other similar horror games that were equally as beloved around the time. This was the spark that started my love of horror games at a young age. But enough about me. Let's talk about the game that started it all. The first Five Nights at Freddy's game was a perfect blend of brilliant sound design and anxiety-inducing gameplay, followed up by some of the most disturbing and uncanny character designs in the form of animatronic mascots that the world had ever seen. During this initial wave of success, Scott didn't decide to just stop there. He decided to capitalize on the hype the game was generating and make something new. He decided to make a sequel to the game. In as short as 3 months following the release of the first game, Five Nights at Freddy's 2 came out on November 11th, 2014. The game may have looked and felt somewhat similar to the first game, but this would ease fans into a false sense of familiarity, because little did people know, this game would be so much more difficult and complicated than the first. The difference between the two games was well known before its full release, due to the marketing of the game through its trailers. There were no more doors or lights, and the empty Freddy head was the only way to protect yourself from these new unknown enemies. With these mechanics in play, there was now a newly found intensity within the gameplay, this being due to the amount of animatronics the player must now micromanage. Now, instead of only having to manage 4 animatronics, the player now needed to manage 10. This increase in the amount of animatronics is one of the many things I absolutely love about this game. The sense of panic from the increase in management makes every decision you make even more important. One misclick or one additional cam flip could easily be the difference between a or a. On the flip side, when you go through an entire night with no major mistakes and finally winning after failing so many times, it gives you the feeling of accomplishment that very few games in the horror genre can replicate. The new character designs alongside the new gameplay was a great way to give this game its own identity. Characters like Balloon Boy looking more human than machine gave off a sense of unease, especially when hearing his iconic childish laugh echo from the vents as he moves closer to your office throughout the night. Or Mangle, a half-disassembled animatronic mess that crawls through the vents towards your office, and upon entering will patiently wait on the ceiling, giving the player a tense feeling, not knowing when the time will come when she decides to cutting your night short. There are many more examples of these great character designs. I could talk about how Bonnie's missing his faceplate, or Chica's lack of hands, but I want to discuss one character in particular, one that has become my favorite character in the entire Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. The Marionette, better known as the Puppet, has one of the creepiest and most ominous designs of any other character in the roster. The empty eye sockets, the open grinning mouth, the tear streaks down its cheeks, and its thin black body that's barely visible in the darkness. All these combined does a perfect job of establishing its fear factor. Additionally, the Puppet is the only character that isn't animatronic. This leaves the question, how does it move? It's hollow and attached to strings. How could it possibly get into your office? The sense of mystery surrounding the character, alongside scary outward appearance, got me hooked from the first time I saw this image. With that being said, the Puppet brings one of my few gripes about the game, the music box. Where do I begin with talking about how frustrating the music box is to deal with? The music box single-handedly is the reason that in the later nights of the game, looking at any camera that's not the prize counter hinders you and will only make things harder to survive. Every animatronic becomes more aggressive as the nights go on, including the puppet. In the first few nights, it's not that big of a concern, but as the nights go on, it only gets harder and harder to wind up the box due to its time draining faster. This then makes the player spend over half the night winding the box, giving each animatronic an easier time getting into your office. So in conclusion, the game was both the best in the franchise and the most frustrating at the same time. The game's highs as well as its shortcomings are the reasons the game is so memorable to me and many others in the fan base. I regard the changes in the gameplay as the most interesting and challenging in the series. Not to Ultimate Custom Night levels of insanity though. I believe Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is the best game in the franchise by far, but that's just my opinion. Leave your opinion in the comments. Tell me, what's your favorite game in the series? I'm interested in what everyone's thoughts are. But that's it for me. Like the video if you enjoyed, and until next time, later.